Hello again, everyone, and it's time for another hop tester. This is a very special one. I've got an experimental batch of hops from Charles Faram. This is CF302, extremely limited, not available commercially yet. And I've been lucky enough to get a pack of these, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing what these brand new English hops can deliver. Let's find out. So I've got to do a massive shout out to the guys at the Malt Miller and specifically James Stiff for hooking us up with these hops. All the guys at the Hop Edition podcast have also received 100 grams of these hops to trial, and there is going to be a specific podcast on the Hop Edition for this hop where we're going to be tasting a variety of beers that we make with these, and also talking to one of the guys from Charles Faram about the whole hop development process and how they've gone about creating this new variety. So these are very much in the trial stages at the moment. As I said, they are not available commercially, but assuming that they do well and they get positive feedback through trials with commercial brewers, and also, in this case, brewers like myself and the rest of the Hop Edition guys and the guys at the Malt Miller who are also brewing a beer with this variety, it may, in a few years' time, end up being available as a commercially produced variety. So I do feel extremely privileged to have been given the opportunity to brew with these hops. There were only 3 kilograms worth of them put into pellet form, and the Malt Miller only got 1 kilogram of those hops, and they were very generous in sending out 400 grams of that to the 4 of us at the Hop Edition. And obviously these are my 100 grams of CF302 that we're going to be getting into. So there's lots of exciting descriptors for these based on what Charles Faram have seen so far when they've been evaluating these. And obviously with the newer English hops, they're looking for some of those more new world American hop characteristics: tropical fruit, citrus fruit, very aromatic, lots of oil content, etc., etc. So fingers crossed, these ones will deliver on that promise. I have been skeptical in the past about English hops that make these sorts of claims. In recent times, varieties like Harlequin have started to deliver on that promise, and let's find out if CF302 will set the bar even higher for these new English varieties. So first things first, let's get into the pack and see what we get on the nose. I'll get my excuses in early. I have had a cold for the last week, so I've not got ideal senses for this at the moment, but I've got to say, as soon as the pack is opened, there is a really strong aroma of sweet kind of tropical fruit. There's some piney aromatics. It smells very much like an American hop to me at the moment. Kind of getting a lime aromatic off of this. Just going to rub a couple of pellets in the hand and then see if I can get a little bit more out of it. Yeah, as far as the new English varieties, this is definitely the most pungent, I think, that I've had in my possession so far. It's very much reminded me of American kind of sea hops, to be honest, is probably the main thing. There's a little bit of tropical, maybe mango flavouring, but there's definitely this citrus kind of lime note coming off of them. A little bit of a piney, slightly herbal thing in there. Yeah, they smell great. So let's get this brew going and see what we see. So I'm going to be putting these into a hop tester batch. I've only got 100 grams, so I've got to be quite judicious with my application of these hops. I am changing up my hop tester recipe a little bit for this one. So I've decided to try and drop the ABV down a little bit, maybe soften the bitterness and the water profile as well for this particular beer. I'm kind of gearing it towards the Murgy Straits kind of base recipe, so shout out to Four Priests Brewery for that one. I really liked the kind of presentation of the hops on that beer when I brewed it, I thought that actually it probably makes a great platform for doing hop testing like this, particularly where you've only got a small quantity of the hops to use, because the ABV is a little bit lower. The grist is very light and will really allow the hops to shine. So I'm using that. It's more cutting out the Munich, bringing in a bit of wheat, and I'm using some Carahel as opposed to caramel, but they're very similar colour-wise. And we're going to be using Liberty Bell M36 on this, mainly because I just fancied a change from US05, and also wanted to see if maybe that emphasises the hop flavour a little bit more than the yeast that I usually use. So yeah, that's what we're doing with the recipe. So let's get into brewing it, and I will give you the full breakdown on the recipe. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get hold of these hops yourself anytime soon, but maybe you could use the recipe that I've done for this with other newer English varieties and see what you come up with. Hopefully we'll end up with a really nice hop forward fruity kind of golden ale. That's the kind of style that I'm going for with this one. So yeah, let's get into the brewing, and then we'll obviously come back with some taste testing on this one, and I'm hoping to get a few more people involved, and we'll have a bit of footage from the podcast that we do with this one as well. So yeah, see you soon. Right then, so here we have the finished product in the glass. I'm really happy with how this beer came out. I think it was a good idea to go with the recipe change up. The final beer ABV did come out a little bit higher than I was intending, but it's still 4.6%. Most of my hop testers previously have been 5% or just above. So have lowered down the ABV, and I think the grist on this does make a really nice kind of clean slate showcase for the hops to sit on top of, and it looks pretty nice in the glass as well. So let's get into an evaluation of this beer and see what the CF302 hops are delivering for us. So aroma, first of all, we've got, to me, first thing that I get is some very light sort of sweet citrus notes and a little bit of tropical aroma in there as well. Specifically, the main thing that jumps out to me is kind of like a melon, so a honeydew kind of melon aroma, and almost like a kind of, yeah, fruit kind of squash, so a very sort of soft, sweet, citrusy flavour. There's quite a bit of floral aroma on this as well, I think, so I wouldn't say that it's got an obvious English hop character to it, so it's not got the kind of peculiar sort of like hedgerow like aromatics on it that I think, or maybe slightly earthier notes that you tend to pick up with even some of the newer English varieties. So yeah, it's very pleasant and inviting aroma on this. Melon, floral, sweet citrus, I would say, are the main kind of things that I'm getting off of that. Now, on the evaluation sheets that I've been using for this beer, which I'll show you some graphs from shortly, I've added a couple of scores for aroma potency and flavour potency for the hop, and an overall rating in terms of enjoyment as well. For the kind of potency of this, you've always got to kind of bear in mind the hopping rate, so it's not hugely hopped, certainly in terms of, you know, comparison to a lot of modern beers, as you saw in the recipe details. That said, it's not right up there with the most pungent of hops, I would say, in terms of potency. So for me, I would put things like your Mosaic and your Nelson up there as far as the ones that really kick out the most aroma, you know, per gram, I guess, if you're going to say that. This is a little bit less potent than that, but I would say it is comparable to some of the other kind of American or New World hop varieties. So I would say probably I would liken this to something like maybe an Azacca or an El Dorado in terms of like the potency of it, but also maybe some of the actual aroma characteristics that I get off of this. So yeah, it's, for me, probably about a 6 or a 7 on that. So let's dive in and see what we get for the flavour. Some of the aromatics are carrying through into the flavour for sure, so there is definitely still some kind of tropical melon notes in there. There's a little bit of the floral kind of flavour as well. For me, not quite so much of this kind of sweet citrus on the flavour, but there's still a little bit of a tangerine note, I would say, coming through from the hops. I'm getting a little bit of a kind of herbal background note there. Yeah, not spicy, but there's, yeah, maybe a sort of slight pepper kind of flavour, green pepperish, or yeah, it's a little bit like that, kind of like the flavour that you get from Equinox maybe. No real earthiness there. Again, I'm not getting the kind of hedgerow flavour that I associate with a lot of English hops and some of the newer varieties. There's maybe a little bit of just a slight tart hint of maybe something like a gooseberry in there, and perhaps a little bit of a berry note, but that's quite subtle. So yeah, flavour wise, again, melon in there, floral notes, little bit of a hint of a kind of herbal and some slight berry flavours in there as well. But overall, just a really nice balance, quite a range of flavours. I wouldn't say one particular flavour or aroma on this hop is massively dominant. I think it will score reasonably well across the different categories for things like tropical, citrus, floral flavours and aromas in particular, but maybe not have one of those dominating per se. But works really well in this kind of beer, so definitely a good candidate for a golden ale. And I think if you did up the hopping rate, could potentially really sing in, you know, kind of IPAs and American pale ales and so on. So yeah, I'm impressed. I think this is an English hop that is ticking some of those boxes for the kind of tropical flavour and aroma delivery. It's not blow your head off, you know, potency wise, but it's getting up there towards where we want it to be for it to genuinely kind of compete with some of the American or New World varieties, you know, realistically side by side. Now, I did say I was going to do a little bit of footage from the podcast. I'm not going to include footage at this point. I think you should go and either watch or listen to the podcast back. There's so much information in there, and all of the kind of data that I gathered from that is going to be in the graphs that I'm about to put up on the screen. Just going to give a shout out to some of the guys from Worcestershire Home Brew Club as well for helping out. I sent them some of these beers to try and expand my data set for the survey as well, and they have kindly sampled the beer and filled in the kind of questionnaire for this as well. So I've got data from obviously myself and the guys on the Hop Edition, Martin from the Malt Miller and Will from Charles Faram. It's Charles Faram, by the way, not Faram. I was mispronouncing it earlier in the video. So yeah, decent set of data on that. And as you can see in the graphs that I'll put up on the screen now, I think, as I was saying, a fairly even spread of scores there for the tropical, floral and citrus kind of flavours and aromas. We're not getting a massive amount in terms of some of the other scores for kind of herbal, spicy or earthy. Pine as well, not scoring particularly highly. So fairly consistent and in line with kind of what I was getting from this beer. We did see some variation in terms of what specific descriptors people pulled out. I'll put up a word cloud for that in a second, which will be generated from the descriptors that people used. Melon did come up a lot though. That was one that was pretty consistent. So yeah, and also looking at the scores for the potency in terms of the aroma and flavour, most people did score it fairly similar to the range that I was talking about in terms of maybe like a 6 or a 7 as far as potency. But the scores for overall enjoyment were consistently high. So everyone seemed to agree. And again, you can go and listen to or watch the podcast to see this for yourself. Everyone agreed that this hop performed really well and produced really pleasant beers. Quite an interesting array of beers that we were testing it with as well. And some interesting results in terms of the differences in flavour and presentation from the hop with those different beer styles. But it worked well in pretty much all of them. So potential to use it in pale ales, golden ales like this, worked well in a lager, worked well in a bitter. I think you could potentially use this in all sorts of stuff, maybe even things like a wheat beer, perhaps like an English hopped wheat beer. This would be quite interesting to see it in something like that. But yeah, definitely your kind of pale ales, IPAs, and kind of hoppy lagers, it's going to do well. So I look forward to seeing this one released commercially. Based on what we heard on the podcast, it might be relatively soon as far as the timeline for these sorts of things go anyway. So obviously you do have to wait, at least a year or two between these hops being sort of approved for commercial production and seeing any on the market. But it sounds like it is going to be coming out, and I would recommend that you guys give it a go when it does. So yeah, that's CF302, a very nice new English hop, hopefully coming to a brewery shop near you soon. Cheers, everyone.
I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, that or his dudeness or duder or, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.